from from Columbia University, Columbia Institute for Teleinformation. We are a research institute that is devoted to, for many years, to issues of telecom, internet, media, economics, management, and policy. So here we are with a session, I believe it's the third session by our newly appointed Director for International Studies, Bill Drake, who has joined us, came from Geneva, but he used to be also, got his doctorate at Columbia, so it was a welcome home with Bill too. And we are now very fortunate to have him as director of this series, which we will start in a minute or two. The topic, obviously, as you know, is the IGF, Internet Governance Forum. Bill will talk about it. Personally, I was kind of fortunate to be at the birth, or maybe call it conception, of IGF, which was the World Summit on Internet Society in Tunis in 2005. And that was an event to behold. There were kings and cardinals and more presidents than you can shake a stick at, and prime ministers and ministers and CEOs. And so it was quite a list of people and speakers. And these were all kind of like the establishment type organization. And then there were, of course, a lot of the activists and NGOs there. And in some ways, the conference was going to be kind of contentious, with the activists pushing in one direction and less developed countries pushing in one direction, the CEOs of the major companies having still further perspectives, but then also divided between Europe and mostly North America. And so one of the things that came out of that was the concept of the IGF, which took place then, I believe, the next year in Athens. And to some extent, it was always seen, at the beginning at least, seen as a safety valve. There were all these people who had a lot to say and wanted to say it very expressively and loudly, whether they were poor countries or NGOs, and let's give them a forum to vent, was, I think, part of the initial thought process, at least by some people and some institutions. But that has evolved over time, and that's what we want to discuss, the evolution and where it is going. Ever since then, the IGF has kind of convened every year, and I personally have been to some of them, Guadalajara and Baku and Istanbul and a bunch of other places, because that's one of the things that IGF does and is being criticized.
Ellie, you're muted.
Okay, yeah, there was some background noise. The question is whether IGF has become some kind of a group of people, interesting people, smart people, people who have something to say, who just meet for meeting's sake. And it's always useful, of course, to kind of make connections informally and formally. Nothing wrong with that, but whether there's actually something that comes out of it has been periodically asked. And usually when the IGF is meeting in attractive places like Bali or Sharm el-Sheikh or Rio de Janeiro and places like that, the question is there something that we can do to make it a productive outfit? And so that is the question that will be discussed today. I pass this on to you, Bill, to moderate this session.
All right, great. Thanks, Ellie. And hello, everybody, again. Welcome. So this is, as Ellie noted, the third meeting.
Drake, of course.
Say what? This is the third meeting in our series on global digital governance, which includes internet governance and the governance of other digital technologies as well. The first two were on the IT plenipotentiary and internet fragmentation. Now we're doing the IGF. Next month, Thursday, February 23rd will be our next session. We will discuss international regime change at ICANN and how we take stock of, ICANN 7 years after the IANA transition to independence from the US government. We'll have speakers like Milton Mueller and others come on and talk about that. So that should be a lively and fun session, and I hope everybody will join us for that. Today, we're going to discuss, as Ellie noted, the IGF with a panel of experts who have been closely involved in the IGF's organization and activities from the beginning, and indeed from before the beginning, when the IGF was just a concept back in 2004. Let me just take a couple of minutes to set up the issue, because not everybody is an IGF junkie. There's plenty of people on this call who lived through all this and know it all well, but there would be some people who didn't. So just to refresh everybody on the same, get everybody on the same page, as Ellie noted, the origins were in the UN's World Summit on the Information Society, negotiations that went on from 2002 to 2005. This was when governments and stakeholders from around the world first came together en masse in a semi-multi-stakeholder setting to consider information society issues. And we ended up focusing almost exclusively, intensively on internet governance. What is internet governance? What public policy issues are involved? What institutions are or should be involved? What, if any, government oversight was needed for what were called critical internet infrastructure resources? That's to say, this was code for the whole debate about whether the International Telecommunication Union should somehow supplement or replace what ICANN was doing with regard to the management of names and numbers, which was a big overarching controversy for many years. In 2004, those of us who were involved in the Civil Society Internet Governance Caucus began having debates about the potential desirability of a new mechanism, as well as the need for a broad definition of internet governance that covered more than what ICANN does, that covered also the use of the internet for information, communication, and commerce. And at the end of the first phase of the WSIS negotiations, the Secretary General Kofi Annan was asked to create a working group on internet governance, or WIGIG, which was 40 members. I and another Raul Echeverria, who you'll hear today, were members, which took some of the ideas that have been percolating in civil society and put them into a proposal to essentially launch what we shyly called at the outset a forum function that would be performed by some sort of a thing, which ended up being specified as the IGF. And at the outset, this was opposed by almost everybody. When the WIGIG report went back to the preparatory meetings of the WSIS, a lot of governments said they were not interested in this, as well as a lot of people in the private sector and technical community. But at the end of the day, when we got to the final summit in Tunisia in November 2005, it was either that we were going to declare failure at this 3-year negotiation because there was a deadlock on fundamental issues around ICANN and control of the underlying resources, or we were going to announce that we were at least continuing the conversation. And a lot of players switched and came along and said that they supported the IGF. So the IGF was created. This is also integrally related to what many countries perceive to be a promise to have a negotiation around so-called enhanced cooperation and the possible creation of an intergovernmental body with omnibus authority over the IGF, which we spent 10 years on, despite the fact that it was completely unlikely, in fact, impossible to reach agreement on something like that. So anyway, the IGF was launched, and it was quite revolutionary, procedurally, open, transparent, inclusive, peer-based, equal footing, multi-stakeholder participation, no fixed membership, anybody could engage, light and bottom-up agenda setting process, and substantively a broad, holistic focus that could cover any kind of issues related to internet governance. And over time, the IGF developed a very loyal set of actors, including many of us here, who were very committed to trying to see this succeed and go forward, particularly in the context of simultaneous pressures from some governments to have instead an intergovernmental centralized control mechanism established in the UN. So the IGF took off and has had now 17 years of meetings, community-driven main sessions and workshops, and all kinds of other types of events have been incorporated into the annual program. And a lot of interesting and important stuff happens off stage in terms of networking and using the IGF as a launch pad to create new processes and announce initiatives, etc. We'll get into all that. So the IGF has been, in a lot of ways, very successful in terms of creating a space within the global ecosystem of internet governance for dialogue and collective learning and sharing of information. But there have always been controversies and debates perennially coming back and forth about the format. Is it inclusive enough? What should be the substantive focus? Are the outcomes strong enough? What is the impact? And these kinds of issues periodically just recirculate. And of course, since the IGF just had a meeting in Addis Ababa in November, December, they were back in the air again. So I thought this would be a good time for us to step back and try and take stock and see where we are and are thinking about where the IGF is and where it could go going forward. And to do that, we have a panel of people who have been, as I say, very actively engaged from the outset. So our panel is Raul Echevarria, the Executive Director of the Latin American Internet Association. He was involved in internet governance for over 30 years and was one of the founders of LACNIC, where he served as CEO for 12 years. He was also chair of the board of the Internet Society for 3 years. And he was a member of the previously mentioned working group in internet governance, where I got to know him, and a member of the IGF's multi-stakeholder advisory committee, or MAG, which has responsibility for the program for 8 years, among other kinds of types of roles. And Raul is joining us from Uruguay. Henriette Esterhuizen is a senior advisor for internet governance for the Association for Progressive Communications and convener of the African School of Internet Governance. Previously, she was for many years the executive director of the APC, which is one of the biggest and most prominent global NGOs in this space, and has served as a member and as the chair of the IGF's MAG. She's joining us from South Africa. Adam Peake is a senior manager for civil society engagement at the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN. He was also very involved with the civil society processes around the WSIS and the creation of the IGF and so on, and is a current member of the MAG position he also served in previously, and he's joining us from the Netherlands. And finally, we have Flavio Wagner, who's emeritus professor at the Institute for Informatics at the University of Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre, Brazil. Previously, he was a member of the MAG and a consultant to and board member of the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee and president of the Brazilian chapter of the Internet Society. So he joins us from Brazil. So we have a very globalized group. So everybody in this group has been on the MAG, including me. But to avoid excessive groupthink and singing for the same hymnal, I'll try to be a little bit of a devil's advocate here and push and prod on some of the hard and divisive points, so we're not all sort of channeling each other's thinking on this. And needless to say, I should take note that everybody here will be speaking in their personal capacity. The views expressed are not necessarily those of any organization they're affiliated with. So we'll do like 5 rounds of tour de table on different topics mentioned in the announcement for this event, and then we'll open it up to discussion. And I see a lot of people online who have a lot of experience and thoughts on these issues. So it hopefully will be a very good discussion. So, okay, so let's get going. Questions to the panel then. Just to get our juices flowing, maybe for starters, we could talk a little bit about your broad sense of the trajectory of the IGF to date. How does the IGF, as it is now, compare with how we were thinking about it back in 2004, 2005? What's in the mandate that was written in the WGIG and approved by governments at the WSIS? How has the IGF evolved over time? I mean, we had an early period where it was very focused on critical internet resources, then it evolved and changed. So how do people see the broad lines of the trajectory I would be very interested in getting the conversation going with that. Who would like to start? Please use your raise hand function. That makes it easier for me to see what's going on. Okay, Raul, you want to take off? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, Bill. And just a quick recognition that I think it's worthy to say, but when we served together in the working group on internet governance in 2004, I think, it is important to recognize that you were the first person in the working group speaking about a forum, the creation of a forum, that we gave the form of that all together later, but I have to recognize that you were a pioneer in that. So it's we have been doing things together for a long time. Okay, so first thing, I think that's the comparison between 2005 and 2023 is not fair. Because the policy portfolio, the policy discussion was much more simple in 2004 than 2005 than now. It is much more complicated, more players and more stakeholders, different organizations involved in the ecosystem, and in even a lot of different authorities locally in every country dealing with policy issues. So it's the challenge of the IGF is much bigger. So it's while the IGF has made a lot of improvements in this time, is a race trying to also to pick the new things and the challenges that are emerging. So I think that I have said that many times that the war definitely is much better with the IGF than without the IGF. So this I'm a kind of fan or supporter, strong supporter of IGF. But we have to recognize that there are things that are not satisfying all the stakeholders, that the IGF should have, the discussions we have at the IGF should have much more impact in the policy development, and the policy development happen 90% at the local level, at the national level, except in Europe that has its own characteristics, but in the rest of the world, it happens at the local level. So we should work much better in the link between and the impact in the discussions that we hold at the global forum like IGF in the policy development. And for that, we need to bring the other stakeholders, higher official governments and other people. And at this moment, I think that's we don't have all the incentives to do that. We can speak more in the second and third round, but so I think that this is my conclusions. Good, that's the landscape changes very much. We have achieved a lot, but other things that we have to work very hard.
Thanks, Raul. Incentives is an important word, as is configuration of interest. So when we think about what's really going on. So let's just go down the row. Flavio, you're next up.
Thank you, Bill. So thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you and all the people for this very interesting debate. So I would say that the IGF is almost entirely fulfilling its role as defined in the WSIS mandate as a premier venue for multi-stakeholder dialogue on internet governance issues. But as Raul already mentioned, the range of interests of the IGF has changed a lot in this meantime. Yeah, the digital transformation of the society has had a dramatic acceleration in the last 10, 15 years since the WSIS. And this process, which is still accelerating, had and still has major impacts on the IGF. From one side, the IGF is not anymore only about the internet. It's about digitization of the society, where the internet is only a mechanism, even if a very important one for this transformation. So we are discussing in the IGF issues like protection of personal data and cybercrime, impact of AI, just to name a few, that are much more the consequences of digitization in general, and not only because of the use of the internet. And from this perspective, I would say that the IGF has naturally and positively evolved and transformed itself on a major venue for the discussion of almost all digital transformation aspects and impacts. From another side, however, as digitization affects all the aspects of our society, it is natural that it became a main issue for many other fora, where classical dimensions of the society are discussed, such as commerce, work, health, education, finance, environment, and so on. So we have now multiple and legitimate intergovernmental and non-governmental fora discussing issues that are also covered by the IGF, as recognized, for instance, in the report from the high-level panel on digital cooperation, so 3 years ago. So from this second perspective, I would say that the IGF is maybe at great risk, since many of these other competing fora and spaces have a decision-making nature and are thus preferred as arenas for the discussion and sometimes even approval of concrete norms and public policies regarding specific dimensions of the digital transformation of the society. So I will leave for now on this, and then we certainly will come back to those issues later.
Thanks, Flavio. Certainly the whole evolution into digital issues generally is one of the big dynamics, and one that we're going to come back to again. Henriette. You there?
Thanks, Bill, and really good to see everyone. I agree with Flavio's remarks. I think it's really interesting, actually, because I think the IGF was, in a sense, a placeholder. It was a gap filler when governments couldn't agree on how to move forward. And I think, so firstly, it illustrated how effectively civil society can actually influence intergovernmental negotiations by providing a creative and innovative solution to essentially deadlock between governments. So I think that was really interesting at the time. And I think what's been interesting since is that the IGF actually developed its own identity. I agree with Rahul, it has met most of what it was mandated to achieve in the Tunis agenda. But I think it has done more than that, actually. I think it has socialized the idea of multi-stakeholder engagement on internet policy and regulation. It has almost generated a kind of normative pressure on national processes that are similar. So you have the emergence of national and regional IGFs, where it's now the done thing to have a national IGF, where you bring together different stakeholders to talk about internet policy. So I think it has actually really succeeded in changing how internet governance and internet policy is being maybe not made, but definitely how it's discussed. And I think what's really unique about it is that it has this capacity to bring together experts and generalists, old-timers and newcomers. And you see that if you look at IGF stats, about 30 to 40% of participants in every annual event are first-time participants. Now, I think that's indicative of the fact that it's generating new participants in the process, new engagement. And that might come at the expense of expert-based policy influence. But the gain is this idea that we had of democratizing internet governance, I think is actually alive. It might not be particularly healthy, but I do think the IGF is generating that kind of thrust. I think the fact that it brings together technical and non-technical people, perspectives, and issues is also pretty unique. I don't think, I mean, Flavio, you're right, there are many specialist forums where more specific, challenges like how to regulate machine learning, for example, is being discussed. But having this broad-based, cross-cutting, multidisciplinary approach, I think that's pretty unique. And it's also intergenerational. So I think for all its flaws, and I think it can be improved, we'll come back to that, I think it's achieved something actually quite unique in having this open, inclusive, participative space. And I think what I'm really worried about, and I'll come back to that later, is that I don't think that's valued sufficiently. And I think the fact that that's not valued sufficiently, to me, means that we're not really valuing democratization of internet policy and governance sufficiently. And I think partly one of the reasons is people become bored. They become bored with particularly those of us who are experts, who are really invested and embedded in internet governance processes. We want more. And I think therefore we tend to underestimate exactly how valuable the IGF actually is.
Thanks, Henriette. I think that's undoubtedly true. Adam?
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's always a bit silly to not put your hand up sooner so that you can try to say the smart things that have already been said. I think something that I've been thinking about recently is, of course, that 2002 to 2005, that was a very different time. There wasn't social media. Facebook was 2006, 2007, iPhones 2007. We're talking about a very different world. We're talking about a very different set of issues. I was on the MAG, and as you've mentioned, all of us were very involved in that early period. And at that time, we were a more coherent group. We knew the issues closely. We'd been discussing them in WSIS. So we came to the IGF with an ongoing conversation and reasonably established memberships of stakeholder groups. Membership's the wrong term, but participants in those stakeholder groups. And that has changed over time as we've changed, as already mentioned, about the issues that we're discussing. 2005, 2006, information society was a concept. We were considering what it would be. What we're doing now is living it. We only have to think of the pandemic and the issues that are raised by accessing the internet, using the internet, and the internet being essential to all our lives, that we've transformed very much, and the IGF has transformed with it. So we're responding to a very different period, and certainly the IGF needs to respond to that as well. Something Henriette mentioned about the NRIs, they are probably the biggest change we've seen. What in terms of how we participate and how we talk about where we come together to talk about these issues. The IGF has always had a tendency to focus upon the annual event, that we're building up to that period in the fall, in the autumn, when we come together in some exotic location, as Ali mentioned. But what the NRIs have done is given us intersessional work, and also work at the national level, of course. And I think we should talk about the importance of intersessional work as we go through this discussion today. It's something that we have spoken about a lot as something that is desirable, but it's extremely hard to achieve. Volunteers, how much time do we have? And also the focus of the IGF and the way it's set up does point very strongly to coming together, whether online now or in person at one of these locations around the world. So I'll stop there, but I do think that we've moved from a period where we were talking about what would be the future of information society to understanding how it works and how it affects our lives. So that's the effect we've seen over these years. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Adam. I was going to move to the next question, but Ellie, are you raising your hand, or is that from before? If you're trying to,
I just wanted to follow up on Flavio's point so that we can have a discussion here, which is that, I mean, he correctly pointed out that the agenda has increased enormously from internet to digital society. But what does that mean? That covers so much ground: market power, infrastructure, human rights, disinformation, governance, democracy, development, standards, social networks, culture, with contending interests, contending ideologies, contending politics and economics. And so the question is, if everything is digital and we talk about it in IGF, then are we talking about everything, and are we diluting? Is there some kind of a dilution going on? I mean, how many topics can you cover? Important topics, no question. But where's the focus then?
Ellie, you're getting ahead of me. That we're going to talk about this later. So if we can
get
back to it, then that's fine. All right. So let me ask then the second question. So let's talk. There's been a lot of debate about the impact of the IGF and very divided kind of views on this. I mean, defenders say that the IGF helps to build norms and promote collective learning and mutual adjustments, has promoted institutionalization of internet governance issues across governments and organizations, etc., capacity building. It's fed into different decision-making bodies, and has also served as a launch pad for many important initiatives: national, regional IGFs, the summer schools in internet governance, the global internet governance academic network, many other kinds of initiatives, dynamic coalitions, best practice forums, policy networks. So people point to all that and say it's making a big impact, enriching the ecosystem. But then there's a lot of other people, critics, who say it's just a talk shop. It has no real role in internet governance, and talking about the IGF distracts us from the need for real international decision making. So how do people think about the impact of the IGF? How do we measure it? How do we assess it? I'd like to hear from the panelists on that point. Yeah, Ellie, you still have your hand up. Raul.
Okay, I think that's at the beginning of IGF in 2006 and so on. The impact was very big, was huge. I would say in three senses. One is because we finally built a place where we could discuss things that at that moment we didn't have a single place to deal with. We have had previously events like INET that in some way were trying to achieve similar things. But in 2006, we didn't have anything. And so that was the first impact. The second area in which I think that the impact was huge was that we brought everybody together. And we could say that in 2006 to 9, 10, we had almost everybody in the same place. Everybody that was involved in this digital policy discussion, on internet policy discussion, was there participating at the IGF. So the impact was very big. And the third area of impact was that the possibility to consolidate the idea that the multi-stakeholder model could work to deal with topics like those that we were discussing. And I remember in Athens, 2006, when we were arriving to the venue at the beginning of IGF, the first day, and I was walking in together with people from governments from Latin America, and we arrived in the venue. They asked, "Where is the place for governments?" And it was very revealing to me. That's saying, "Oh, this is the reason why this was important. It was important to build something like that." Because so we changed that. It looked at that very unrealistic at this moment, but in 2006, many governments still thought that they needed a place only for them. But I think that in the last few years, or not just a few, probably in the last 10 years, we lost impact because, as we say before, the number of players increased very much. And so we still have important people and relevant people and high quality people going to IGF, participating of IGF discussions and bringing their intelligence. But the people that is taking decisions at the local level later is in most of cases is different people that and in several areas, in consumer protection, in data privacy, in taxes and many other things. So really, I think that's using the same word that Eli used in his intervention. I think that it was diluted the impact and of the IGF, and this is why we have challenges. I think still I'm very optimistic, but we have to recognize where the problems are and to work together and how to face those problems.
Thanks, Raul. Who's next? I don't see hands up.
Bill, I can go next.
Yes, go ahead.
I think impact is, I'll do that next time. Impact is about politics and power. I think perceptions of whether the IGF has impact or not, when it had impact, what kind of impact, is very much shaped by who's doing the assessment. I think in the first few years of the IGF, there were interest groups that were very firmly wanting the IGF to prevent more governmental oversight, to prevent any kind of regulation. There was a sort of a libertarian culture. There was a sort of hands off the internet culture, very much coming from business and the technical community. And they succeeded, actually. They stopped any serious discussion about internet resources at the IGF for quite a while. But it also succeeded, I think, that it succeeded in building more buy-in and more engagement in the multi-stakeholder process. It did not succeed in having serious conversations about the role of government and serious conversations about when to regulate, when not to regulate, how to regulate, what to regulate. Now those discussions are being had at the IGF, maybe not as effectively as they could be. I think the other area of impact that I think is very much underestimated is the IANA transition. I think the IGF was the sandbox where all the issues about internationalization of ICANN, broader democratization of naming, management of names, that played out at the IGF. And the IANA transition process had its own structure. It took place under the wing of ICANN, and it worked very well. But the IGF was the place where all the noise could be heard, and I think incredibly helpful for the IANA transition. And I've heard people that were part of that transition, like Fiona Alexander at the NTIA at the time, saying that the IGF played a very important role. And there are other things. I think human rights, the whole idea that human rights is a legitimate internet governance issue, getting the Human Rights Council to pass that resolution on rights that apply offline, also applying online, again, taking that to the IGF and making the technical community also aware of the importance of social issues, economic issues, human rights issues. I think the IGF played that kind of role. I think gender issues, LGBT issues, and the IGF is the space where many of those issues, which those that come at internet governance from the narrow perspective, would not actually have wanted to discuss about it. And I actually thank the WGIC at least once a week for coming up with that broad definition, because I think coming up with that broad definition of internet governance that includes the use and abuse of the internet, I think has created the scope for this kind of whole of society, multidisciplinary approach to internet governance. And then I think the other thing about the IGF, and I think you guys in the North, I think those with power, those with influence underestimate enormously how valuable the IGF is for actors from the global South. It is a space that's much more accessible than even many other UN spaces. And now that the IGF has become so much better at facilitating virtual participation, I mean, that's enormously valuable to people who struggle and who don't have the resources or the opportunity to participate in other global governance processes.
Absolutely. By the way, I took a lot of grief for the broad definition, so it's always fun to say that. Flavio.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Let me try to address the question of impact from a different perspective, from the perspective of the outcomes that were mandated in the Tunis agenda for the IGF. So if we take civil society and most parts of the academia that participate in the IGF, they are certainly happy with the fact that the IGF now discusses almost all dimensions of the digital transformation of the society. These groups are keen to discuss issues such as privacy, protection of personal data, social impacts of AI, human rights, and all the other issues that Henrietta already mentioned. So these issues are now covered by the IGF. So this evolution of the IGF scope is certainly welcomed by these groups and have a large impact from this perspective. But we must recognize that there is a kind of wall separating two camps in the IGF community regarding this mandate. Yeah. And so the question to the impact depends on which side of this wall you are. So if you are on the camp that prefers the IGF just as a discussion space, talk shops, then you are certainly happy that the IGF has remained so. And I would say that most governments and major part of the private sector, and to a lesser extent, maybe some parts of the civil society, are on this side of this wall. But if you are on the other camp and you were expecting the IGF has more tangible outcomes, for instance, making recommendations when appropriate, as written in its mandate for Tunis agenda, then you are certainly kind of unhappy about the evolution of the IGF. And I think this is the side where most of the civil society is probably placed. So why hasn't the IGF evolved in this direction? Well, mostly because of lack of consensus within the overall IGF community. So, and then I come back to the question, the issue I mentioned before, that since there are now many other competing fora that have a decision-making nature and are preferred as arenas for the approval of concrete norms and public policies, then this puts the IGF at some risk. So even if we want to keep the IGF mostly as a talk shop, that which only indirectly influences decision-making processes being developed elsewhere, it should be at least a relevant talk shop. It should, for instance, attract all stakeholder groups, even governments and private sector, all parts of them. So it should attract many other stakeholders that are still left outside and know that many groups are still missing. So until now, from this perspective of making recommendations, for instance, we have not yet seen major norms or initiatives coming directly out of the IGF. They indirectly, most probably yes, but not directly coming out of the IGF. So it has an indirect influence on norms and initiatives, as of course it promotes better understanding between the stakeholder groups. But personally, I would prefer a more direct influence. If the IGF does not negotiate the norms itself, it should at least propose norms and discuss them. And it definitely could launch and develop initiatives that end up on norms. So, thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, so first, Bill, thank not just you, but other WIGIG members. The definition that gave us of and on the internet, the notion that it's not just internet governance of the technical layer, but also the activities that take place is extremely important. And we saw this last year when working groups were debating how to consider internet fragmentation, a topic that I know is important to you, Bill, and others, and also it is a key topic, and the way people began to think about it was fragmentation of the technical layer. So that's, of the internet, and then fragmentation of the user experience and how that manifests itself. And that is really an extension of the on and of the internet that we see in the WIGIG definition. So thanks, and it's helpful, and it's still helpful. Back to impact and learning, and I will again, I work for ICANN, but I'm not really giving an ICANN perspective at all. But the transition is a very good example. There was a meeting, I think 2013, where there was a main session that considered principles of good internet governance. And at that time, there were 20 to 25 principles, documents about what governance was, OECD, Council of Europe, African Union, and those were brought together in a discussion to highlight the commonalities and what the meeting thought were good. When we came together about a year later in Net Mundial, we built off those, and Raul and Flavio will remember, particularly from being part of that sort of discussion, that these became part of the Net Mundial. What is internet governance? What are the principles and norms for internet governance? Those Net Mundial documents were the first documents that were included in the ICANN community chair's initial document to set up the discussion for the transition. So you see how these things evolve from a period of time in different spaces, and how the IGF was the initiator, as people have said, about things that are affecting important governance topics like the IANA transition. And this has still been taken up in discussions last year about AI governance. Henriette's absolutely right that the IGF is important because it brings in the global south and more inclusive voices. It was very clear that the speakers in main sessions were, while they were from the Council of Europe, OECD, European Commission, they began by recognizing the importance of multi-stakeholder participation and the global south, that their work won't go forward without those voices being included. And again, they were talking about what is good governance for AI and referring back to some of the principles that we saw from 2013, from Net Mundial, etc. So it's iterative processes, and the IGF is very useful, both convening voices, making sure we have inclusive processes, and that we learn from each other. So it's a good thing. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Adam. All right, so look, let me ask one more main question, and then we'll start to move towards opening it to everybody who wants to speak, because we've got a lot of people here who have deep experience with IGF. But I think we have to talk about this question of outcomes, because it's been with us since the beginning. It's been with us since we wrote the mandate in the IGF and included language about the ability to adopt recommendations as advisable, et cetera, et cetera. It's been debated extensively since then, the Tunis agenda, the 2012 working group on improvements, the Net Mondial statement in 2014, the UN DESA retreats in 2016, 2021, and more recently we've had, heads of state, Emmanuel Macron, and also the Chancellor of Germany saying that we need more concrete outcomes coming out of the IGF to make it useful and so on. So I think we really need to talk a little bit about, is there the possibility to adopt something that counts as, quote, more concrete outcomes? What could that entail? What sorts of issues? What types of mechanisms are we talking? What's conceivably possible given the configuration of interest? Could we do recommendations or just messages as we do now, or adopt opinions like the ITU's World Telecom Policy Forum does, which is a little bit more informal, or options for action, which I've tried to argue for before, that we're allowed different types of views to be put on the table. How do people see this question? I mean, we've been debating this from the outset, and it's still with us. It still shapes much of the politics around the IGF. So I think we have to tackle it. Raul, what's your thought about this? Raul, your sound's not happening.
Sorry. Now, yes. I spoke before about that we need better incentives for meaningful participation in IGF in order to increase to improve the link between the discussions at IGF and the policy development at the local level. And one of the things that we need is that we need coherence and connections on the topics that we are discussing. There is no incentive for many stakeholders to go to IGF if the things that I'm discussing in the region with policymakers are absolutely different than the ones that I'm discussing in the IGF. That's one point. And the other point is that there is no incentive to go to IGF if we develop some kind of common understandings and general principles about how to deal with certain issues at the IGF. And when I come back to the region, I have to start from zero the discussions with policymakers that have a lot of creativity and are proposing ideas and solutions that are absolutely opposed than the things that are gaining traction in IGF as a common understanding. So I think so how to help to that? So the first thing is the connection in the topics. So what are the things that we are discussing? What are my daily job? My daily job, how I use my days is discussing about taxes, content moderation, fake news, impact on democracy, and other things. So if the discussions at IGF and possible outcomes can help me in advance the discussions that I have every day with policymakers, so it's a good incentive. I will continue supporting IGF and going and attending. If not, I have to prioritize. So connection to the topics. Second thing is that we need more focus. That I think that we have improved the focus of IGF, but we still need more focus. And the leadership panel can help on that, bringing advising the IGF, saying, oh, guys, we have to discuss those 2-3 things. If you want to discuss other 20, that's okay, but we need some discussions and outcomes on those 2-3 things that are the pressing issues. And of course, I think that there is a lot of room for improvements in diversity also at the level of the leadership panel. And it is crucial in order to really to have valuable advice and connected to the things that are happening in the world. And finally, yes, I think that we can produce outcomes, and it's possible. We already did it. We did it in El Mundial. We never ended to learn the lessons from Net Mundial, and we can do that together. But so we need to bring we need different kind of high-level sessions, much more focused, as I said before, and to put some very high level ideas, very high level principles. We don't need recommendations, very high level, but things that can help the discussion at the local level, saying this is possible, the best way to go through, and this is not the way to go through. So don't insist going in that direction. This is wrong. It's proven. This is everybody agreed in those international debates that this is the wrong path. So don't waste time doing in that direction. So these kind of things can help. We did it. We can do it again. That's I think there's a political willingness to move forward.
Do you want me to go next, Will? Sorry, shall we follow the same sequence? Will, you are muted.
You didn't have your hand up, so I missed you. Sorry. Go ahead, Amria.
I didn't have my hand up. I'm going to respond to this question in two parts. Firstly, I want to debunk this whole notion of outcomes and locate it in its political context. Where did the demand for the IGF to produce outcomes come from in the first place? It came from those governments that wanted emphasis on the enhanced cooperation track from the Tunis agenda, those states who felt that the IGF was all very well, but that's not the real issue. The real issue was the unresolved role and responsibility of governments when it comes to oversight. So those governments that were ambivalent or critical of the IGF were the ones that first raised this critique of it not producing outcomes. So, and I think what happened then is that everyone started kind of, jumping on that bandwagon without really thinking about what the agenda or the Tunis agenda's mandate is for the IGF, what the value is of the IGF, and what it means to democratize and make internet governance more inclusive and more open. And I think trying to do both, trying to be this very open and inclusive forum, and I agree the IGF can do that better, and producing outcomes is actually, I think, pretty difficult, but I think it's possible. I just think we need to be a little bit skeptical and look at the historical context of this whole debate about the IGF just being a talk shop and not producing outcomes. But now when it comes to producing outcomes, I think the IGF, I wouldn't necessarily call it outcomes, but I think it really is wasting resources and wasting people's time. And now it's currently working with its intersessional modalities. It has these kind of best practice forums and now policy networks. It also has the national and regional IGFs, and dynamic coalitions, which are communities of interest that are self-organized. And they together represent, a vast number of people, maybe not in numbers, but in diversity and a lot of knowledge. And instead of having a model that's a bit more like the IETF or like the ITU, where unresolved issues that emerge from a global IGF is then delegated to these intersessional bodies to come up with, do some research, do some stakeholder consultation, come up with more in-depth recommendations, which then go back to an IGF or go to other policy forums. There's just a lack of continuity and integration. The IGF has become a lot of dots of disconnected modalities, which I think if we actually tie them together more effectively, more creatively, we can maintain that open, inclusive space for broad-based discussion and debate on policy, but also in a few more focused areas, do more in-depth investigation and feed it back into the IGF process. And from that, if it becomes substantive enough, into other policy-making processes. The problem with the IGF's outcomes as they are being packaged and generated at the moment, they're just too superficial to really be of value to any hardcore policy-making process.
Thank you, Andrea. And I have to give you the award. The IGF has a lot of dots of disconnected modalities. It definitely gets the award for UN Speak for the day. So that's great. Okay, my modality says to turn next to Flavio.
Thank you, Bill. So Henriette was talking about the BPFs and policy networks and dynamic coalitions. If you want to go, for instance, for the IGF Plus model that has been proposed by the high-level panel on digital cooperation, and the model there proposes a policy incubator. In fact, the BPFs, the policy networks and dynamic coalitions, which, as Henriette correctly said, still do not play a prominent role they could deserve. They are very adequate, in fact, mechanisms for implementing this function of policy incubation as proposed in the IGF Plus model. So rather than establishing a whole new structure, a policy incubator, we just need to further develop these intersessional modalities. They should be given a clear mandate, working procedures and principles, and receive more resources and administrative support by the IGF Secretariat. And certainly the WSIS plus 20 and renewal of the mandate of the IGF would be a very good occasion to give this new role to these intersessional modalities. There is also proposed in the IGF Plus the cooperation accelerator. And that's a good idea. Maybe it's not a too complicated thing to implement, but of course it will need a new dedicated structure. So it would include members with multidisciplinary expertise, receive organizational support by the IGF Secretariat, of course, and could monitor the work of different bodies and on cross-cutting digital issues, identify lack of cooperation, and where necessary, facilitate cooperation across a wide range of institutions and processes to strengthen cooperation and coordination. This would already give the IGF a more important role in this whole digital cooperation arena. So I entirely agree that the IGF should produce shared, agreed texts, maybe norms, but at least proposals of norms, as long, of course, they are non-binding. So very high-level things like Raul already said. So this is essential if the IGF wants to keep a prominent role in this arena, and especially regarding the GDC. We will talk about the Global Digital Compact certainly in the sequence here. But to produce this kind of outcomes, certainly the IGF needs new structures. We don't need to touch on the current structures; they can be kept, but we need something else. Maybe we will need to start experimenting possible new structures, like in the kind of sandbox approach for developing and testing innovative approaches for the development, for instance, of concrete recommendations or proposal of norms or agreed texts. So one possibility is, it has already been mentioned by Raul, is to use a kind of net mundial-like approach. We could choose one or two issues every year. Let's start to begin by choosing a very specific issues for which there is already kind of rough consensus in the community. For instance, respect for human rights online or desired characteristics of digital governance model. Then the community is invited to send contributions in a special call, dedicated multi-stakeholder committee, which would be different from the MAG, takes these contributions and drafts a first text. The text is put to public comments, then the committee takes the comments into consideration, drafts a second version, which is published well in advance of the IGF. And this version is then discussed during the next IGF, and the final version is prepared. And this could run as a new kind of parallel intersessional track in the IGF cycle. And I think a multi-year plan for the IGF would fit very nicely here. If we knew in advance the issues to be discussed in the IGF 2024, for instance, in this new net mundial-like track, then not only the community at large, but also the intersessional IGF tracks and mainly the NRIs would have plenty of time already in 2023 to discuss those issues and prepare contributions to the open call, let us say, with deadline in March or April 2024. So that the multi-stakeholder committee responsible for this track would have time to prepare the draft for discussion at the IGF 2024. And then this feedback loop could be closed, as the NRIs could, after the IGF 2024, digest the proposed text or norms and suggest new improvements to them. And I don't think that this type of mechanism would turn the IGF into a negotiation platform, which is a fear from many stakeholders, as texts and norms would not be binding. And I think this also solves one of the problems that we have, is that the feedback loop with the NRIs is still deserves attention. Yeah, it's hard because the MAG decides on the main issues at the beginning of the year, January, February, and then comes a call, and then maybe it's too late to influence the agenda of the NRIs, and it's too late for the NRIs during the same year to discuss those issues and then prepare contributions to be taken to the IGF.
Okay, Flavio, I want to get Adam in here quickly, and then we're coming up on the hour, and I want to turn it to the broader open discussion. So if we move this along. Thank you very much for that. Those really, Adam, just
very much like the idea of adapting some net mondial-like process in exactly the way Flavio has said, except I wouldn't like it to see it replace what happens in the IGF itself. I wouldn't want to lose the richness of best practice forums on gender, on other things that are broadly outside of my general, the work that I generally do, and I expect many of us do, and there will be many issues that we would all miss out on if we didn't keep the IGF. We have tried over 2022 as the MAG to respond to the themes of the Global Digital Compact with an idea that the IGF would then be able to provide a contribution to that process. And that worked quite well, I think, probably until the IGF ended. And I think we didn't know quite what to do. What do you do when you've had main sessions and working groups and so on producing relevant info? How do you bring that together in a way that can contribute? As Henriette mentioned, the outputs or the documentation that we produce from the IGF aren't really suitable for that, which leads to another point, which is who's going to do that? Either it's a professional staff, and I'm always concerned about funding, and I can be very boring about it and would be very happy to do so. I think it's important. I think, anytime we have a good idea, and you can think about the recommendations we've heard from the UN Secretary General's process of a couple of years ago about the IGF Plus. If you don't cost these ideas, recommendations are just wish lists. Right. So that is important. We could do a lot, but we do need money to do it. And I think these are very good ideas. But the other thing we're finding is that in intersessional processes, the number of volunteers who are involved throughout the year are not high. There are a lot of people participating in NRIs, but there are not a lot of people participating in dynamic coalitions and best practice forums. We have other things to do. So, we need a realistic recognition that resources are important, whether they're human beings or their money or whatever. But I would really like to see how a net mondial process might work. See something in the chat from Henriette about who would validate these outcomes. I think you would validate it in the same way as we did the net mondial, which was to present to the room and call for the room. This is always difficult. We would now probably call to a hybrid room, but there are ways of doing it. You're never going to have full consensus, as we found in Net Mondial when we met in person. Part of the room remained seated rather than standing in acclamation. Yet the process went forward, and you can always note dissenting voices with their point of view as well.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks.
I want to open it up soon. We usually like to have a half hour for open discussion. But before we do, Henriette, you just wanted to get back real quick on what Adam was saying?
Thanks, Paul. Yes, I'll be quick. I think I also just want to do a reality check on the Net Mondial. Net Mondial was great. It produced a great outcome statement. And where is it now? Not any place where it really should be, because it wasn't able to cross over into the intergovernmental space. So I think just let's not be naive about how the world works, and having these multi-stakeholder collaboratively produced outcome documents, they're great and they could be influential, but we need to think about the institutional challenges and channels. And then secondly, I think, Adam, I know we need money in the IGF, but there are lots of good ideas. There was the IGF, the UN convened an expert group meeting early last year in New York. It's not the first time. There are lots of proposals about how to make the IGF more effective. but they just never effectively implemented because the structure of the IGF is such that accountability isn't clear. There's no real governance or oversight that is public or transparent. I mean, the UN, you know, there's management and coordination, but there's no real political leadership or the capacity to actually make plans and produce results. You know, a little bit of results-based management is what I would like to see in the IGF, and an institutional structure. You know, in the early years of the IGF, when I think it really had a lot of impact, when Marcus Kuma was the executive secretary, there was something about that structure, about having that person who was available to other stakeholders, available to funders, who took responsibility for the IGF actually living up to its potential. At the moment, that responsibility is very distributed between UNDESA, the IGF Secretariat, the MAG takes a little bit of it, now the leadership panel takes a little bit of it, but there's no real accountability for implementing and introducing improvements, which we have lots of suggestions to do.
Okay, thank you, Henriette. So, you know, I wanted to close with a round about looking forward and how IGF engages with the broader digital governance space and so on, but I feel like we need to open it up. A number of people have sent me private messages wanting to say things, and I see Ellie's got his hand up already. So why don't we just do that, and maybe when people are responding to points, and if the panelists can be concise in responding to points, we can cover a number of them, and hopefully we can feed in some of that forward-looking stuff as well. So, okay, I see Ellie and Nigel have their hands up. Larry Strickling sent the message. I hope others will get in the queue as well. Ellie, go ahead.
Thank you. It occurred to me that, see, since 2005 or 6, when this all when Athens started, not only did the themes evolve, but also the technology. So now we're here and we're talking to each other all over the world with per Zoom, etc. So the technology did not exist then, and so IGF kind of had to be physically meeting, and the physical meeting meant also that there was only one meeting a year because it was expensive and complicated to organize. But now we don't have to do that, and I'm perfectly aware of the advantages of rubbing shoulders and shaking hands, etc., etc. Nevertheless, if you have something in Addis Ababa, I mean, who's going to come? It's selecting a location like that is an exclusion. Now, I know you can, it's hybrid and you can participate, but you create this kind of two-class type system. It seems to me that given the fact that we have so many themes and we have the technology, why does it have to be one meeting per year instead of having little, smaller, specialized, focused meetings 2, 3, 4 times a year? With broader membership, but possibly participation, but possibly with different participation depending on the topic. This way you democratize, you open, and you have more focus.
Thanks, Ellie. It should be noted, of course, that Addis was not exclusionary for Africans and people in Europe and so on who could get to it easily, but for Americans maybe. But I tell you what, let's take a few questions and then go back to the group and circle around. So
I'm sorry, Bill, I have to disagree. You have to, it's not just the geography, it's the question of where is the kind of, where are the people who are participating? If you've got a lot of people in the internet who are in California, it's extremely difficult for them to kind of travel these long distances. I know it's the other way around too, which is why electronics makes a lot more sense than having to buy airline tickets.
Right, sure. It's a United Nations thing though, and when a sovereign state bids to be the host, then there's a dynamic. But anyway, got you, and we'll come back to your points, Ellie. When people speak, could they identify themselves in case there are others who don't know them? Nigel Hickson from the UK government. Nigel, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, and I'll be brief. Thank you so much, Bill and colleagues, for hosting this session. Really important discussion. Just a couple of observations. One, totally agree with Adam and Henriette and others that the strength of the IGF as it has evolved has been in the national and regional initiatives. I mean, these are what really drives many of us, I think, listening to these incredible conversations in countries where multi-stakeholder processes, haven't been as embedded as others. Secondly, the intersessional activities and best practice forums, etc. Really incredible, policy work going on there and bringing people together. And thirdly, just to reinforce, Bill, what you just said, I thought the Addis Ababa IGF was incredible. It was one of the, I have difficulty in sometimes remembering them all, but for me it was a great occasion and marvelous to see so many African participants from many different stakeholder groups. The question I think really to the panel is how we go forward, not just in the enhancing the effectiveness of the IGF, which of course is in train, if you like, with the adoption of the high level panel, etc. But also looking forward to the WSIS plus 20 review process and the renewal of the IGF mandate during those discussions in 2025, and how we can really work together to ensure that we have a successful outcome to those discussions. Thank you so much. Oh,
Sure.
and it's Nigel Hickson, UK DC MS, which stands for the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. So how about that?
You guys get the award for worst acronym. So congratulations there. So all these other people have been sending me messages. Anybody want to raise their hand and get in the queue and say something? Larry or Chris or other people, please jump in if you'd like to add to the conversation in a way everybody can hear. Why don't we have people respond, the panel respond to the 2 points that have been made so far while others think. So Ellie raised a series of points about decentralizing and having more meetings and so on, sort of changing institutional structure to open it up more. And Nigel raised a number, well, I don't have to repeat the points. So let me come back. Raul, why don't you respond to whatever bits you think are you'd like to speak to.
Okay, thank you, Bill. I thought that you would open the discussion to more people. I was expecting.
I'd like to, but people aren't raising their hands.
I see Larry's hands on the.
Oh, you do? Well, I don't
Yes.
see it. Okay, good. Where? I don't know what screen Larry's on, but I'm not seeing his hand raised.
Larry S.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not seeing him, but Larry.
I see it. And obviously,
Oh, there he
Raul
is. Hey,
saw
Larry.
it.
Sorry, you didn't pop up on my. All right, go.
No worries. And I preface my comments by saying I have not attended an IGF since a Geneva meeting, like in 2018 or whenever it was. I can't quite remember it, right around the holidays at the end of the year.
Larry, could you say who you are for those who don't know?
Larry Strickling, currently a neighborhood vagrant in the south side of Chicago. Prior to that, I was the administrator at NTIA for 8 years during the Obama administration, and was around for things like Net Mundial and the IANA transition and Wicked and all those wonderful times we had back in those days. When I first was interested in speaking on this, it was before Henriette made her comments, which I basically subscribed to near totally, which relates to the IGF and defining reasonable outcomes for IGF, and then thinking about it in terms of what are the opportunities for IGF to achieve certain outcomes short of actually making decisions and perhaps even making formal recommendations, because we know that process, particularly the decision-making process, can be long, can be expensive, requires very intensive activity by a committed group of people who remain committed to the process for whatever period of time it takes. So at one extreme, you had the IANA transition that cost in the tens of millions of dollars and engaged several hundred people, and it took 2 years. Now, there is no way that a more informal group like the IGF could even organize itself to conduct that level of decision-making activity. And at the end of the day, the IANA transition basically was one question and 5 criteria. So it wasn't while it became very complicated, the original task was actually pretty simple, but it still took 2 years and I don't know how many millions of dollars to get to an outcome. I even think that the current structure of the IGF meetings, as I remember them, and they may have changed, although I don't think they have, makes it very difficult even to coalesce around a piece of paper with some recommendations on it. I mean, typically the international meeting is a series of workshops and seminars where people come together for 90 minutes to 2 hours and then they go on to something else. Again, there has to be a certain level of continuity and commitment and engagement, even to generate a single piece of paper with some recommendations on it. Those of us who were at Net Mundial will remember that was, I think, 2 or 3 very intensive days to generate a document. And it had involved people all focused on that one task, working late into the evening to generate a piece of paper that was able to be reviewed and, I don't want to say adopted, but at least received feedback and endorsement by the participants there. And I think folks may not remember, but there was an attempt to take the Net Mundial outcome document and create the Net Mundial Commission that foundered, after several months because of the lack of buy-in by key stakeholders, as well as perhaps a little too much top-down design in terms of what the commission ought to look like and what it ought to do. And so it abandoned some of its core commitment to bottoms-up multi-stakeholder decision-making by the way it was organized. So it makes it hard. But let's come to the good features of IGF, which Henriette talked about in great detail. It's a way to engage people who might not otherwise have an opportunity to be exposed to a lot of these issues. It's an opportunity to create an agenda as to what are the key issues people around the world are experiencing and want to hear from other folks to share ideas about how to approach it. It's an opportunity to create momentum around certain issues to make sure that other bodies may take them up in a more concrete and formal way. These are all incredibly valuable outcomes, and I do think they're outcomes, and I think that's the strength of IGF, and it would be where I would suggest focusing to continue to expand and burnish those outcomes. And to that point, I think Ellie's suggestion about how do you make this thing more open and available using modern technology, that I think it fits very well into the idea of the IGF as an organization that's going to bring people together who perhaps don't have an opportunity to participate in some of these discussions where they live or work, and expand the universe of people who can have the opportunity to participate and talk about these issues. So I think IGF can be very, very successful without rendering a single decision, without necessarily rendering a single recommendation, but simply as with what it's done over the years, it's been very valuable. So sorry for the rant, and I will sit back and listen to the rest of you.
That wasn't the rant, it was great, except for you mentioning Net Mundial initiative, which is by Fight Club rule. We don't talk about the NMI. So, all right, good. So let's take a few. Great to see hands up. So Paul, then David, and then I think we just lost somebody. Paul, David, and then we'll circle back to the group. Go ahead, Paul. Paul's the chair of the MAG. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, so just one point, I really resonate with Henriette's comments and Larry's as well. But something we seem to have collectively failed to do is really capture the imagination and the interest and engagement of the broader parts of the tech community, the bigger parts of the tech community that are the ones that are making the market moves that really have direct impact. And I know people have talked about that for a long time, trying to figure out what's the best way to get that engagement, and we haven't, I don't believe, found a perfect solution. And that is something that in the MAG meetings last year, we spent time talking about cohesion and trying to make sure that we were cohesive in our selection of sessions and topics, but we continue to struggle, I think, with getting the caliber or the quantity of engagement from the larger parts of the tech community, and I think there's work to be done there.
And Paul, perhaps you should say that you were in that tech community for a long time.
Yeah, I was in the tech community for a long time, and I would say that, you know, in the business decisions drive everything, and engage. The IGF engagement was always important, but not important enough to get, you know, over the hill to being truly leadership perspective.
Yeah, I've always felt like there's not enough private sector engagement from beyond North America myself, and some European, but this is a whole nother issue. All right, we have a couple other people, and we'll circle back to the panel with the time remaining. So Chris Buckridge and then David Allen, go ahead.
Thanks, Bill. Hi, everyone. I'll be really very brief here because I'm agreeing with a lot of what's been said. I think Paul just then made a really important point, and I think actually even in a technical community organization, so I work for RIPE NCC, one of the regional internet registries. Sorry, I'm also on the MAG. I guess I should mention that. But I think even in one of those more traditional technical community organizations, we see that there are elements of the technical community now that are having, you know, driving the industry, driving the technology that we're not connecting with. So there is that, and I hesitate to use the very overused word, but there is that fragmentation happening. And the IGF itself is just one of the institutions that is having to grapple with that and find its way. I think just responding to the sort of discussion that Ellie kicked off there, I think absolutely agreeing with others who've said the NRIs are important, the intersessional work is important. It's important to have use digital tools, digital remote tools to meet, but none of this is either or. I think ADIS was a great meeting, and it really did highlight for me, and I think for many of us, others who were there, the importance of these physical meetings, the importance of bringing together people in such a sort of significant event like that. It's not, it can never be accessible to everyone, and that's the drawback of these events. It will always be that, but it has its place. And so we need to find a way to strike a balance and to use the best of what we have available to us and make those integrated. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And yes, and we have to remember the remote aspect. I mean, we've always had in the IGF strong remote participation support. And for people who don't want to fly from Silicon Valley, that, you know, they could join remotely, they don't. So David, go ahead.
I'm David Allen in Concord, Mass. Bring you a perspective from outside the beast. It goes back almost 25 years now. First participating in WSIS and then coming forward through IGF today. I'm part of something known as the JustNet Coalition, a group of 41 organizations around the world. I am struck, once again, looking back almost these 25 years, how the principal topic today is outcomes, because that was the principal topic at the beginning here. How could IGF have an impact? Myself, I pick up on what Henriette pointed at, which is, where's the power? And she put it in terms of demand. Where is the demand for IGF output? If the governments, private sector are not looking for that implementable outcome, maybe there's a reason why that has never solidified. Personally, I would suggest looking at another notion that Henriette crystallized, which is the noise. The noise is incredibly valuable. It bubbles up from the bottom, all those things that are getting missed at the higher levels. The suggestion I'll make here is that the focus, let's use the word in the way I'm intending it right now, for IGF become not what policies can we get implemented, but what can we contribute to that discussion process that wouldn't get there otherwise, to value the noise, in other words. Thanks so much, Bill, for making this happen.
Okay, thank you, David. All right, so you know what? I'm going to circle back now for 2 minutes each from each of the panelists, and then we'll wrap this up. We might go a couple of minutes over, hopefully not. And I'm going to go in the order that people have raised their hands to mix things up. So hopefully you could pick up on some of the different points made by Ellie, Nigel, Larry, Paul, David, and whoever else I'm forgetting. And also maybe if you've got any thoughts about looking forward and the broader digital agenda that Guterres and others are pushing in the role of IGF, and that's helpful too. So whatever you got, let's start with Adam. Go ahead.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, so thinking a little, following on from Ellie's point about, I suppose really it's how do we make the IGF more hybrid and more all year round. Something that Henriette tried as the chair in 2021 was to begin the development of a main session process. Main sessions usually reflect the themes of the year, so are sort of inclusive in that sense. And it was an attempt to begin preparatory sessions during that sort of 2 to 3 month period before the physical meeting happened. It was not as successful as we wanted, partly because it was hard work. It's over the summer in the global north, and it's sort of like we're all on holiday. But there's a demand on volunteer time, but it could be made to work. It could be looked at again. We do have a habit in the IGF of trying things and not making them, not looking at them again. It was a very good idea. It could work well. I hope that's not my phone. So I do think that's worth looking at again, and it would give a way of including people throughout the year in the key parts of the process. Paul mentioned the tech community, and I think this is really beyond the technical community in the sense of the ICANNs, the IETFs, and the regional internet registries. These are the companies that are based on technology. It's not even Silicon Valley, it's the banks, it's airlines, it could be anybody whose whole business model is dependent upon using any new technology. AI, for example. And I know that there are efforts in the leadership panel underway to start doing that. So that is good to hear. And hopefully we will hear more about that over the coming months as the leadership panel develop. Thinking about the future of WSIS Plus 20, it's around the review is around the corner. We're getting there. There's even the potential for whether the IGF is worth continuing renewal. Are they going to suggest something different, or are we going to get, as we had during the WSIS, a renewal of discussion about issues like, hate to say it, enhanced cooperation that distracts us all again from issues that we should be talking about, which is the future of information, digital, or whatever society we're talking about. So WSIS, let's think about it. Let's be aware of the pitfalls. Let's not make it all about enhanced cooperation and whatever it is that some governments want to do with the technical layer and controlling it. It should be about much more, and I hope it will be. So yeah, thanks very much. Thank you for putting this together, Bill.
Thanks, Adam. Enhanced cooperation will never die. Raul. Raul, you're muted.
Yes. Takes 2 seconds. I'm here. Thank you very much. I wasn't at the IGF this year in Addis Ababa. I think it was a very good meeting. It was a very well populated meeting. It was much than I expected, and the level of participants and discussion was also very good. I think I felt that we were discussing about the right things, the right topics. It is true that I was surprised by the decrease in participation of some classic stakeholders, many of them from technical community. I think that ICANN was an exception. That they were there with a good team participating and involved in many discussions. But we still need to make those discussions relevant for different stakeholders, and especially for the decision makers in every region. I think that there is a lot of work to do still on improving the diversity. I'm very concerned about the lack of or the low participation of stakeholders from Latin America. I think that Brazil is an exception. They always are very committed and participating heavily, but we didn't see significant number of public officers from Latin America in the meeting, and some of the ideas that I think that are very valid and very important ideas that have been discussed here. We need connection with the main topics that are being discussed around the world. We need more focus. I think that the leadership panel can help on that, but we also need to improve the diversity of the leadership panel. And so I think the idea of having some outcomes processed through a Net Mundial style process on 1 or 2 topics every year would be very good. So for that, we need a kind of closing session with a Net Mundial style. It would be a way also to attract the high-level officers from governments to participate in that discussion. I understand the challenges and the changes in that we have seen since 2014. That Adam mentioned, that the difficulty to ask for that kind of acclamation as we did in 2014. Finally, I think that's I hope that the mandate of IGF is renewed in 2025. But if it is done, it should be accompanied with the allocation of resources from some stable resources beyond the money that is collected from donors. That is an important source of, and I think that should continue, because some organizations that are collecting money from internet users or different stakeholders groups, especially not-for-profit organizations, should continue supporting IGF. And but we also need some stability and sustainability, and it should be only warranted with the official funding from UN contribution on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raul. Okay, we've reached the half hour, so we're basically out of time. So let's try to be really Flavio and Henrietta, if you could have last word very concisely, and then we'll wrap up and try and get out before too many people drop off for other commitments. Flavio, go ahead.
Thank you, Bill. So just my final quick words. We did not have time here in the debate today to cover, for instance, the Global Digital Compact. And of course, there should be a strong relationship between the IGF and the GDC. I would like to see the IGF as the focal point for starting now for the discussion and the formulation and follow-up of the GDC. But as this process is already running in the UN system, I don't think this is achievable anymore. But maybe there is still time to dedicate a large number of sessions of the IGF 2023 to the GDC, not only in terms of content, but also the future role the IGF may play with regards to the GDC. Maybe it's still possible to give the IGF a prominent role in the follow-up of the GDC, for instance, on the continuous assessment of results obtained by countries and other relevant stakeholders regarding the GDC goals to be formulated. And remember, the NRIs would build a formidable network of resources and expertise to help in this task of assessing the goals of the GDC. So it has already been said, yeah, the IGF original terms of reference are already 18 years old. They must be necessarily revised, and the WSIS +20 process is the right moment to do that. The internet has changed a lot in the meantime. Digital transformation has changed the society and so on. So the IGF modalities of work should be revised. And if we want to advance something new and align it with the IGF plus goals or with the GDC, and also produce more tangible outcomes, then the IGF mandate must be changed. And I hope that the renewal of the IGF mandate includes concrete measures for advancing the IGF role as a focal point for digital cooperation, as proposed by the IGF Plus, by the high-level panel of digital cooperation, for implementing some of the functions that have been proposed there, and for advancing towards the goals to be established by the GDC. And the community should start working together ASAP. and develop a concrete proposal. Maybe I see Chris is there. Maybe the MAG working group on IGF strengthening strategy could start, for instance, drafting a proposal for new IGF terms of reference as a contribution, including both new structures regarding the IGF plus model and role in assessing the GDC goals and implementing some of the improvements that have already been proposed. Is this achievable? Yes, well, we have 2 years ahead to make it possible. Maybe we start drafting an initial proposal, see how they are received by the community, by relevant stakeholders, and by the UN. And just to conclude, yes, money and funding is essential so that we have a more robust secretariat. But as Henriette already very well commented here on the chat, we need institutional will from the decision takers in this process.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Bill.
Flavio. Henriette, you get the final word.
I'll try to be quick. Thank you, Bill, and thanks to everyone for really great input. I think we need to seriously think about what the value is and what the value add of the IGF is and what it really takes to continuously, incrementally strengthen this way of bottom-up inclusive policy processes and with all its added, I think we forget how important that is. So I think Larry also said that really well. Next, I think the IGF needs to clarify its identity in response to that and really assert the value of its original mandate. And instead of in response to poorly articulated and I think politically motivated criticisms, such as not producing outcomes, actually really assert the value of its original mandate and do what it does best better instead of trying to do things that it might just not be suited to doing. Perhaps the IGF is better, in my view, for getting inputs, unpacking them, monitoring them, and then producing, responses to that. For example, I saw the UK government in our call, they shared their online safety bill at the IGF and they got feedback. The European Commission is doing that. That's the value of the IGF. Use that bottom-up crowd to deconstruct, to unpack, to critique. Don't expect it to produce very sophisticated policy recommendations, although I think that can be done in a more focused, narrow way using the intersessional work. I think the issue of institutional will is essential, and that's linked to institutional capacity. I think there's been a tendency to not really do strategic assessment of where the Secretariat needs capacity, and just to give it more work. The leadership panel, that's a whole bunch of new work the IGF Secretariat has to deal with. When in fact, what I think the IGF Secretariat could be better off with is a liaison person who deals with government, who deals with the technical community and really nurtures those relationships. So, and I think just finishing what it starts. I think the IGF is very good at getting community input, and the community is very committed and provides that input. And I do not see the UN, I do not see the MAG or the Secretariat, and this is partly capacity, it's partly will, implementing that. We have the expert group meeting, we have the working group strategy, and we really need to see serious commitment from the UN, from UNDESA, from the Secretariat to taking that seriously. And Adam, I really actually do not agree with you completely. And maybe this is because I come from civil society. We never have money. We only get money when we come up with decent strategies that meet real needs. And we come up, with good plans, and then we get money. And I think the IGF will get the money because I think the demand is there. It needs to have clear strategy, clear vision, and good institutional will from its hosting institution. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Henriette. And you raised the point about the relation with the United Nations. That's another topic I wish we could have gotten into, but just not enough time for everything. I just want to close by saying this year's IGF is in Kyoto in October. Kyoto is very much worth going to in October. I strongly encourage anybody who has the means to consider doing it. It's a lovely place. I want to thank everybody for their participation. Obviously, there's much more here to be said, but not enough time. We will talk again, as I mentioned, in February at the next session about ICANN and what's going on with ICANN years after its independence. So I hope you'll come back and join us for that. And with that, I stop and I turn it over to Ellie for closing.
Thank you very much, Bill, and thank you very much, speakers and participants. This was great. This was really interesting. And I think the importance of the IGF, in my mind, is partly because it is a unique approach for international cooperation that involves governments, but not only governments, controlled not by governments, bottoms up community. So it's a really very interesting model that could be important for other sectors too, not just for ours. I think that's one of the important thing is kind of how do we teach others our experience. But conversely, there are other efforts of international forms of collaboration and cooperation, whether it's in taxes or in aviation or whatever it is. And in some ways, we should not become too siloed and kind of learn from what works and what doesn't work. And that might enhance and make more effective what IGF does. So thank you very much for participating, all of you, and we'll see you in a month. Thank you, Bill in particular.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.